So it is 11:30 Eastern time, 10:30 Central, 9:30 Mountain, 8:30 Pacific. This is AMCC's 30-minute Monday morning national call of regional leaders and BFFs focused on strengthening the American manufacturing cornerstone. I'm Matt Bogosian, Executive Director of AMCC. And our usual and dedicated MC, Michelle Burris, of one of our founding partners, the Century Foundation, is out right now in Baltimore getting a tour of a manufacturing facility. So I'll just kick us off here on the call to say welcome. And I hope you're having a good summer. Certainly a busy one. If you're new to these calls, you know on some of them, we have round robin discussions where anyone can chime in on best practices to share, problems to confront, events that folks ought to know about. On other Mondays, we have short presentations focused mostly on the big 6 elements of a thriving manufacturing ecosystem. So today we have a presentation regarding capital access, and so excited about that. But as you also know, before we get into those presentations, I like to highlight a few things in our weekly AMCC update that goes out at the end of every week by email, like our calls and AMCC in general. It's free, open source. If you're not in on this, just send us a note. We can get you those AMCC updates. So for last week that went out on Friday, the AMCC update had a whole slew of information, but 3 things I want to point out. One is this Manufacturing Momentum Summit. It's going to be in DC, September 12 to 14. I know some of you around the country are going to be coming to DC to present, but we want to have a whole great turnout of regions and BFFs. It's been a long time coming from our partnership with DoD ManTech, who is awesome. They've hired our good friends at CREC to put it on. Let's see if I can pull this off and drop the link into the chat on that. Then folks, it's also in the AMCC update, but I'll do it here also just so folks can get dialed in. Let's see here. There you go. And let's see. So that's one of the things I wanted to highlight. Some of you might have seen Michael Britt Crane at ManTech, who's been a great partner. He is going to be on special assignment for 6 months or so. He's going to be conducting a pilot assessment for DoD on the DoD organic industrial base workforce readiness. So he sent out a note to folks last week on that front. But he couldn't be more enthusiastic about this convening, and he'll be coming back to his main position. But we got a lot of teammates there, Mike Gilroy and many others that are going to be holding the torch. So that's the first thing I wanted to highlight. And if you need travel funds, there are some travel funds available. So send us a note. We can get you in on that. If that's a need you have, there might be some money for that. So let us know on that. So that's first thing from the AMCC update. The second thing, kind of more momentum toward collective impact is in the Friday update. We shared news about several interagency agreements in the federal government. I was in federal government, and getting these agencies to work together to help regions kind of in an integrated fashion is a trick. So it just shows good progress. I say good early steps. So, and I think that's in part from your voices saying, "Hey, look, we need all of these pieces to be working in concert." So it's hard work to do those at the federal government level. So kudos to getting started on more of those, and thanks to all the regions for having a steady voice of saying, "Hey, we need an integrated bottom-up approach to strengthening the manufacturing cornerstone." The last highlight from the update I want to make is around the Recompete program. So I think we've shared a lot of information about that. On next Monday's AMCC call, we're going to have somebody from EDA talking about the Recompete program just to you all. So get your questions ready. They have a webinar set up for the 11th of August also. I think I said this last week that, you know, first step, check it out. There's a map. Let's see if I can post that in the chat too. There's a map. Check out a map and get this map out to your stakeholders to see in your region, you know, where it makes sense and is relevant to you all. And then you'll be prepped for the call next Monday. So those are the three things I wanted to highlight. But I don't want to take any more time because we want to have questions at the end. And, you know, all along, if you have things you want to share, put them in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers, put those in the chat. So this is very informal. It's great to have you on here. Without much further ado, I want to get at introducing our speaker from Youngstown Business Incubator, Barb Ewing. Now, this is another, you know, result of these in-person meetings. We're doing these AMCC roadshow visits. Really, they're co-hosted events around the country with many of you regional stakeholders to help you herd your own cats and share with us best practices that can be shared around the country. So one of those was in Youngstown, Ohio. We had a visit there, thanks to America Makes for co-hosting that. And that's where we met Barb. And it was awesome. You know, she came right up. She's working on a lot of cool things around capital access, one of our big 6 priorities to strengthening regional manufacturing ecosystems. That's not ours. It's what the evidence says are the 6 key component parts of thriving manufacturing ecosystem. So we need to iterate on that. We need to try new things. Barb's super excited about that. Of course, AMCC now has Sarah Lee as our senior advisor for capital access. So a lot of good things going on, a lot of activity in capital access. And so we thought it would be great to have Barb on to share with you all around the country and with BFFs alike some of the things that she's got going on. So Barb, please take the floor. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. I was struggling to come on because my microphone often causes feedback. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, good. So I'd also like to introduce now, so that you're not surprised when he pops up, Dr. Scott Shane, who is the fund manager for Comeback Capital and who does a lot of our entrepreneur and residence work. I'll come back to what that means, but he's on the call as well. And I'm going to give a very quick introduction and then really hand it over to Scott to talk about the details. So appreciate the opportunity and glad that you came to Youngstown so we had the chance to start this path together. So very quickly, YBI was formed as an incubator, a digital incubator, software incubator in about 1990. By 1997, we had the fastest growing software company in the country as part of our portfolio. And for about 2 decades, that's all we did. We did software incubation and developed a pretty successful model, grew from 1 building to 3, and felt pretty good about the work we were doing. But our board started pushing us because Youngstown is a community of manufacturers, that if we were really going to have a full impact, we needed to figure out how to engage with them. And so we worked with YSU to do some small programs, but didn't really see any significant results until 2012, when we had the opportunity to be part of the team that put together the proposal to bring the what was originally called the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation. That's now Manufacturing USA, but we were able to get the flagship program, the one focused on additive manufacturing, housed in Youngstown. It's now called America Makes. It is the national accelerator for additive manufacturing or 3D printing. It's not administered by us. It has a separate organization that runs it. But when America Makes came on campus, it opened new doors for us. It really helped us redefine ourselves. And so now we see ourselves as an incubator of not just software, but also additive manufacturing specifically, but we do work in other advanced manufacturing technologies as well. We have a 65,000 square foot manufacturing facility that is fast becoming too small. We are looking at ways to increase the amount of square footage that we have for advanced manufacturing startups. We also run programs to support the adoption of additive manufacturing and industrial IoT by traditional manufacturers. We run a program with our MEP that focuses on both additive and industrial IoT. We take the lead on additive, they take the lead on IIoT, but we've got some pretty good expertise in that as well. We also have programs to support the submission of SBIRs and STTRs, and just worked with Matt and David on furthering that partnership. And at some point, love to talk to you about that as well. Very quickly, we also run programs for women, minority, veteran-owned business, and a youth entrepreneurship program specifically focused on our urban cores. So we are a pretty diverse organization. We've got a staff of 18 plus the entrepreneurs and residents that Scott represents. One of the biggest challenges we face is getting capital for our companies, whether that's on the technology adoption side, and we do everything we can to mitigate that, but more importantly, having our startups get the funding that they need to get their boots on the ground and up and operating. In software, it's reasonably easy to bootstrap that. When you start looking at the needs of a manufacturing company, it's just very different, very, very different. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott, if I saw he just popped in, to talk about some of the challenges that we face, some of the companies that we're working with, but more importantly, the work that he does for us and building out this capability. And even though I think we're doing good work in this, there is much work to be done. So Scott, please take it away.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot, Barb. So I'm going to start and give a little bit of just background on me so it frames the discussion. So I actually have 3 jobs. I'm a Mixon Professor of Entrepreneurial Studies at Case Western Reserve University. I've been doing that for I've been a professor in a business school for over 30 years, right? So part of this is the expertise that I have on the research and teaching side is the creation of early stage companies and the financing of those companies. Second job is that I am an entrepreneur in residence at YBI. And what Barb has done is given me the tasks of all the activities related to helping the early stage companies get financing, right? So other people are better experts on how can they do sales, how can they do marketing, how can they build their technologies, et cetera. I don't really know that stuff, but I do know how companies get financed. The third activity is that going all the way back to 1998, when I was teaching at Sloan School at MIT, I made my first early stage investment into companies. And so I've been a longtime investor in early stage companies. And about 2017, that led to me as an angel investor being asked by Barb to a meeting in Youngstown where 2 congressmen, at the time, Tim Ryan from the Youngstown, Akron area and Ro Khanna from Silicon Valley, were traveling on a bus through the Midwest with what I think is the best way to describe it is $8 billion of capital under management looking for how to invest outside of Silicon Valley, San Francisco, New York City, and Boston, right? This was a bunch of big fund VCs, things like General Catalyst, GGV, Founders Fund, SoftBank, et cetera, and they were looking for the model. The short version of the story is that I pitched these folks on an idea of how they could invest outside of the center of venture capital outside of San Francisco and New York City. And that is to invest in a fund that deployed money in very early stage companies elsewhere, alongside high net worth individuals investing in those that part of the country. Now, you have to understand, like, there's 3 entities with problems that would like to invest and get capital into high growth companies everywhere else in the country. Number 1 are the entrepreneurs who don't have any connection to where the capital is, right? The capital is relatively concentrated in these places in the hands of these big funds, and there's really no connection if somebody sits in Youngstown or Indianapolis or Nashville or much of the country. Second problem is high net worth individuals who sit in places like Milwaukee and Kansas City and Cleveland, et cetera. Those people generally don't see enough local deal flow to be able to invest in these companies, right? That it's hard to get the scale that they need. Third group is the big funds cannot worry about little rounds and little companies far away from them, because if you're deploying $1 billion of capital under management and you are trying to do this in 20 companies, you cannot worry about $500,000 rounds in an early stage company that is 1,500 miles from where you are. So we created the Comeback Capital Fund. We invest in these early companies. Just to give you an example of this activity, we invested in the very first round of a company called Path Robotics, which solved a problem on the software side of controlling robots to do welding. That's a computationally very difficult problem to solve. They solved it. Now they have subsequently raised $250 million of total capital, raised money from big funds. But at the beginning, coming out of Cleveland, they had to get started. We invested in Lincode Labs, which is providing a computer vision solution to see defects in manufactured products, right? And that was an interesting case because they focused heavily on metal products. They are in Southeast Michigan, Bangalore, where they're doing the tech development, and Menlo Park, where they need to be because they need to be near the investors, right? So this is these activities. So I'm going to pause in a second here, but I want to say that this is an actual fund with money that comes from the private sector. We have two kinds of funds, one that has leverage from the state of Ohio, focused on Ohio companies, one for everywhere else in the US, all private capital, all working under a true venture capital model, okay? The second thing is that there's a synergy between the activities that the fund wants to do and the activities that like Youngstown Business Incubator would like to do for EIR. So for example, we run now a tech evolution virtual pitch event where startups, we can handle about 7 or 8 of them per session, do pitches and answer questions from venture capitalists and sophisticated business angels. I say that because everyone has to be accredited investors involved in the activity, and the idea is to get these companies funding. So the idea here is that a lot in manufacturing, early stage companies need equity capital. It's not to say they don't also need SBIR and STTR money. Not to say they don't also need debt financing, but you can't do building these companies without the equity at the early stage. So I'll pause there and see if there are questions or comments or directions people want me to take this.
Hey, Scott, this is Matt. So I'm wondering about the landscape. So if you think of the continuum of capital that manufacturers need, we have roughly 300,000 manufacturers across the country. Some of them, just trying to get capital to bring in, a new equipment. Others are, at the more cutting edge innovation stage, like you described. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the landscape of connectivity to these different segments of capital? So let's just take yours, for example, and you have a good example of a VC fund for the cutting edge type of companies that are, up and coming. And we need a lot of that. We need leaps of change, right? And so a lot of that innovation is going to come from that segment of manufacturers. Is there anyone curating the landscape of that in some kind of open source public way? Because that's kind of what AMCC is trying to do overall for all of these 6 key components of a thriving manufacturing ecosystem. So to me, it'd be really nice if we could find a shortcut on capital access of some player that was doing that, so that the regions could have confidence that when they tap into kind of that landscape, curated landscape that they could direct stakeholders to those capital access providers. Yeah.
So, okay, so I'm going to say that I don't really, I mean, I have tangential relationship to the activities that aren't really early stage venture finance, but I would kick to people like Barb and others about, well, what are the other sources of activity, across the country for manufacturing? Because to be honest, venture capital is almost never going to go into companies that are more at the early stage, more than 8, 9, 10 years old at all. Right. And so, all these like manufacturers that have been around for 50, 60 years that are trying to innovate, the source of capital they're going to get, it has nothing to do with venture capital. Venture capitalists are not, they can't do it because the truth is that it's an incredibly expensive source of capital and the growth rate has to be astronomical, right? We're talking expectations of investors of 30 times their money, right? 30 times your money is just an incredible expectation, and people who are growing 25% a year can't do that, right? They can't generate that. So even if they innovate well, and that's important, they can't do that. So I think the space that I'm talking about is complementary to the people who are developing early companies, right? Like usually technology driven off of something to solve a problem. And most likely those are companies that would also be doing STTR and SBIR grants that support the technical development and the problem solving that they're doing. The other part, there's a big tail and I just don't know about it.
No, it's good. No, thank you. So just talk about your zone. Who, if anyone, is curating the universe of opportunities for your zone?
Well, okay. So part of this is difficult in the sense that the opportunities overlap with other things, right? So there's no such thing, right? I don't know of any venture capitalist who would say, I would never invest in anything but manufacturing. Right now, they might be like 80% wanting to do manufacturing, but when opportunities come along that touch on manufacturing, they're probably going to do that. So part of this is it's like a Venn diagram. There's a set of early stage investors, some of whom would not touch manufacturing, but some of whom would, that would be appropriate for these companies. That's one circle. There's plenty of organizations. I mean, we know them, but I can put in touch of people who've curated sets of venture capitalists where there would be an appropriateness to anybody doing manufacturing. Then there's a set of overlaps to though connections to the kinds of problem sets where it might be a more hard tech problem and they might need more different kinds of government funding and the overlaps there. In many cases, there's workforce development pieces because manufacturing tends to be higher in employment per dollar of capital developed than, say, pure software, right? So therefore, there's a lot of workforce development things, not just the federal level, but at the state level, and then the other economic development activities at state level. There's people who are curating all of those things that you could get and then create. You could take that aggregate and like basically slice out the pieces that don't matter to manufacturers.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's kind of consistent with Elizabeth Henry's put a question along those same lines in the chat for you and Barb, saying, what role do you think early stage investors and incubators have in supporting the new executive order on domestic manufacturing? I think what you just said there, Scott, kind of addresses that, but wanted to see, because Barb, you are like trying to do it in your region and you want to share those best practices around the country, which is awesome. And hopefully this leads to somebody curating this for manufacturing. But anyway, wanted to get that out. Yeah.
And I don't disagree with Scott that there is, he made a statement that there's probably no universe where a manufacturer would say that they would only invest in manufacturing and not in, I'm sorry, where an investor would say they would only invest in manufacturing and not software. But the opposite is certainly true. There are lots of people who will only consider software and would not consider investing in manufacturing with, you know, the blessing from the angels. They probably still wouldn't take that. And that's one of the problems we're trying to address. There's just a huge gap in investors who are interested in the space.
So how do you get, Barb, how do you get in, you know, investors interested? What's your quick take on that? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to pass it back over to Scott because he is very good at it. He has done a great job of building this network, but I think it boils down to talking to as many different people as we can talk, including groups like this, to spread the word and see if they can tie us into anybody else. But Scott, if you've got a better answer that's more methodical, I will take it.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of angles on doing this stuff. So one of the things is whether the idea here is that a person is literally making something, manufacturing something that's novel, which requires one kind of investor. In many cases, this is like a very deep tech, like we're going to make something out of a material we've never made that thing out of before, and we don't know if we can make the science work, right? Kind of one end of this. The other part are, you know, what our fund does, and the reason there's a lot of overlap with software, is that what most investors want to do is a productivity play, right? If you can make some existing business way more productive, right, then those kinds of businesses will gladly buy your product and you can have a lot of success. So most of these sort of software applications software is a good thing to make manufacturing better, right? The classic example of this, and people still do it, is like literally walk around manufacturing plants with pencils, pieces of paper, and clipboards, right, to gather data. That is not a 2023 data collection method, right? The computers are way better than human beings at that. You can make the manufacturing much more successful. So part of that is that the play to the manufacturers. Then there's another example of this, which is going to things that relate to the executive order that I think is important. A lot of people are doing things where the value add to their customer doesn't actually lie in the hardware that they're making, but lies in some other thing that they're doing, but they need to make products, and those products are not made here and they can't source them. So for example, we just invested in a company that puts underground water sensors that wirelessly transmit, and then like you can, farmers can then free water and solve a lot of the other problems that they need in the agricultural space. Now, the problem is they needed physical pieces of hardware made in China that they could not get, right, to do this. And then they need, in their own ecosystem, American manufacturers who might be 100 years old to go back to making the piece of hardware that they need, because they went away from making that piece of hardware for whatever reason, because it wasn't lucrative enough, and they those kinds of things. So I just say this because part of this is investors are looking to make money. And if you present them with problems of companies that are early stage companies that solve a problem for a customer in a way that would make the investors money, the investors will listen. And that's in fact what I'm doing.
Scott, that's great. Thank you for that rundown. We hope with you and Barb, this is the beginning of a long relationship to work on our capital access for the manufacturing sector. Looking forward, send us whatever supporting documents on that. We'd like to keep these calls to exactly a half hour if we can at the top of the hour. We're here. Anything else for the good of the order? Awesome. Thanks again, Barb.
you,
and
Matt.
Scott, you guys are great. And until next week, have a good week. All right. Bye-bye.